important thing was to go over the first group homework assignment, homework 4. And so for that purpose, I'm gonna share my screen with you. And nope, that was the wrong thing. That's the wrong thing. It's in here somewhere. There we go. Can you see the graph there?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So this is the problem that starts off with the internet and your ISP, your internet service provider. So the way these problems always start, and I chose this because this is a really clear picture of what I'm looking for. You start always from your initial equilibrium. Here it's labeled E1. And there's a equilibrium price one and equilibrium quantity one. So this is where the story starts. And then in the first scenario, it says, suppose your ISP replaces the old dial-up service with broadband. The question is, what does that do to the demand and the supply and the equilibrium? Okay. The way I do these problems is I always start by reminding myself of the things that shift each curve. So for example, the supply curve depends on the price of the product, the quantity, the cost of production, and the production technology, okay? So a change in the price always shows up as a movement along the curve, so you can rule that one out. The only things that shift the supply curve are changes in the cost of production and changes in the technology of producing the product, okay? So in this case, none of those things is affected. So let's look at the demand side of the story. Demand depends also on the price, but it depends on income, tastes and preferences, and the prices of related goods like substitutes and complements. Again, a change in the price shows up as a movement along the demand curve. So it's the other things that cause the curve to shift. So in this case, we're going from an inferior product, dial-up, to a better product, broadband. And so we can conclude from that that there's going to be an increase in demand for internet services because the service is better. Technically, we would call that a change in tastes and preferences, since the new product is better than the old product. So what we see here on the graph, and it's pretty clear, is the whole demand curve shifts from demand 1 to demand 2. So it shifts to the right, which, since quantity is on the horizontal axis here, a rightward shift means we're moving to higher quantities. So demand actually increases, and that's what we want to see. Now, a couple things to point out here. If we go back to the initial equilibrium, when the demand increases before anything else changes, what happens is we go from this point straight over to the new demand curve right here. So at that moment, before anything else happens, there's an increase in demand to here. So there's a higher quantity demanded. Now, if you think about it, we're no longer in equilibrium, okay? So what's the situation here? Is demand greater than supply, or is supply greater than demand?
Demand is greater than supply.
Right, because we were in equilibrium, and then the demand increased. So now the demand is here, or I should say the quantity demanded. Quantity supplied is back here. So we have a shortage, right? Mm-hmm. There's more demand than supply. We know that the way that shortages resolve themselves is an increase in the price. So EP0 doesn't stay there, okay? Instead, that increase in demand causes a movement along the supply curve. We end up at equilibrium point E2 at a higher price and at a higher quantity, okay? When you get done with the graph, you go ahead. Was there a question?
No.
Okay. So when you get done drawing your graph, what I always like to do is take a step back and say, now, does this make sense? Is the graph telling me a story that makes sense? Okay. Demand went up. So according to the graph, the result is going to be a higher equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium quantity. Well, that makes sense to me because more people want the product. And so the quantity rises. And the only way to persuade firms to supply more of the product is to end up paying a higher price. So this diagram is a correct analysis of this first part of the problem. Does anybody have questions?
So the three questions kind of were, one, the first question was based on the supply, the second one was based on the demand, and the third question was the new equilibrium in regards to the first and second one.
It's when you combine both the first and the second.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So actually the first was demand, the second was supply. But
right, yeah, from the graph from the first question, because I redid the graphs. The first question was demand. And so the supply curve didn't change, but the demand curve shifted to the right. And then the third part of the first question where the supply curve stayed the same, but the demand shifted. Yeah. And then it took me a while to get that, and I had to go back and do the modules again and again to kind of just get the gist of it. I don't think I don't remember our explanation for in the group. I don't remember if the explanation was as apt.
This is kind of like riding a bike. At first, it's hard to get, but once you get it, you won't forget it.
Got it.
Okay. And the thing is, being able to tell the story, being able to explain what's going on is just as important as drawing the graph, because that shows that you really understand it. Though on the other hand, because my exams are going to be multiple choice exams, you just have to identify the right part of the explanation. So you don't have to actually write it out yourself. I give you choices.
Okay, that would be good.
Okay. So the second part of the problem says, now suppose that the local government decides to subsidize broadband. And the reason why is because it's beneficial for people to have access to the internet in a given community, okay? How does a subsidy affect the producer?
It allows you to produce more.
Right. A subsidy is like a reduction in your cost of production. They're actually paying some of your cost, okay? And you can see that on the graph, okay? If we start from our E1 here, the subsidy basically is this vertical amount here. It's the difference between the original supply curve and the new supply curve at the same quantity. So that's how much the subsidy is. And so what that means is if nothing else changed, the firm would be willing to lower its price down to this level, okay? But what's really going on here is the firm with the subsidy is now willing to supply more of the product. And so what you see is a shift in the supply curve to the right, meaning the same cost of production is now going to yield, and the same price is now going to yield more supply of that product. Okay, the result is going to be, with all of that extra supply, the market price has to fall to P2, and the market quantity increases to Q2, okay? So anytime one curve shifts, like in this case, supply, you're moving along the other curve. So here, the supply curve shifts out and we move along the demand curve. When you move along demand, what that means is price and quantity have to go in opposite directions. So when price goes down, quantity goes up, and that's exactly what happens here. Everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
So the equilibrium at the second point is now higher than it would be at the first point.
What do you mean higher? It's a higher quantity, yes.
Higher quantity, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lower price, but it's a higher quantity, correct. Okay, now part 3 is the tricky part. In part 3, what we say is suppose both of these things happen, okay? Then what you literally want to do is add the first graph to the second graph, okay? So in the first graph, we have an increase in demand, a rightward shift in the demand curve. And in the second graph, we have a rightward shift in supply, which is an increase in the supply curve. All right. And then from that, you're supposed to infer what the new equilibrium is. Now, the tricky part is when you do this, when both curves shift, you're going to know for sure what happens to one of the variables, either price or quantity. Now, in this case, when demand goes up, what happened to the quantity?
When demand goes up, the quantity...
Demand went up, so what happens to the quantity?
Does it decrease?
Why? More people want it. Sorry, go back to here.
Yeah.
So I
Demand
think
increased, and so more people bought the product.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Case, supply increased. So what happens to the quantity there?
It increases.
It increases, right? So what you have in the third part is the quantity goes up for 2 reasons. It goes up first because of demand, and then it goes up again because of supply. And you can see that on the graph here as you go from E1 to this intermediate point to that point. For sure, the quantity is going to be higher than when you started. The problem comes on the price side here. When both curves are shifting, if you know what's happening to the quantity, you can't be sure what's happening to the price. And the reason why is when demand increased, the price wanted to go up. When supply increased, the price wanted to go down. So the price could go either way, or it could exactly balance off. Okay, what it's going to depend on is which curve shifts more, supply or demand. And without having the data, you won't know the answer to that question. So the correct answer for this is the equilibrium price could go either up or down. You just don't know with the information that you have. Sometimes, say in another problem, it'll be clear what happens to the price, but you won't know what happens to the quantity for sure. Do you guys understand? That's kind of a subtle point there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right. So you really need to know how to do these kind of problems. There will be one of these problems on the first exam, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. And even though the exam is multiple choice, I set up a scenario just like this problem. And I walk you through it, and I say, you know, which curve shifts, and what happens to the equilibrium price, and what happens to the equilibrium quantity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let another curve shift, and so forth and so on, right? So this is really important to learn. And so I recommend you learn it now. Supply and demand is not just our first model, but it's probably our most important model. We're going to be using it over and over again. All semester long. So the sooner it makes sense to you, the sooner everything will make sense to you. Okay, any questions?
I don't think so.
Is that a shoe collection, Mackenzie?
Oh no, that's okay. That's all my no. That's some of my shoes. Yeah, I have a lot more in the closet. Like,
I'm not judging. I'm just observing.
yeah, it's just that's not even half of them. So we're just gonna. It's my.
But they're
supply.
still very well. They're very well organized.
Oh, that's just the heels. So I needed to not have stuff on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me push ahead a little bit here. The next group assignment we're going to do is going to be in about 2 weeks. I haven't put it up yet on the website, but basically it's an assignment to work together to review for the exam. Okay. And there's a specific thing I want you to do, and I will definitely let you know. When I've done this in the past, people like it because it's a good way to review for the exam. Sounds like somebody's having dinner.
I was probably just moving
I
my
think I
plate.
just came from dinner.
Oh, okay. Any questions about anything else?
Are we not doing the third group assignment?
We're not. We
Okay.
we passed that opportunity.
Okay.
Don't worry, I'll add something else for you.
No, that's fine.
Now, in terms of the exam, it's online. Is there any specific location you'd like us to take it? I think I've asked this
No.
question.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. Take it wherever it's convenient.
Okay.
No, take it in your dorm. Take it in an academic building. Basically, you'll have 60 minutes to do it. Actually, I'll give you a little more than that. It's 30 multiple choice. People generally have more than enough time to do it.
Okay.
And so it's just basically take it wherever,
Wherever's
relatively
convenient.
whenever during the day.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll give you a 24-hour window when you can take it. You know, if for some reason you've got something going on in your life and you can't fit it in there, I can adjust that, you know, forwards or backwards for you.
Yeah.
So do we have to tell you ahead of time, like we're going to do the exam on this day, or is it more of?
No. The exam is on the date that's already scheduled.
Okay.
On the course website. If you look at the navigation bar across the top, it says exam dates, and if you click on that, you'll see the dates. So I believe it's like the exam is like 2 weeks from Monday. I would have to.
It's the 29th, isn't it? It says on Friday the 29th.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then, I'm assuming that's you know, I haven't checked it in a while, but what happens is I'll give you from midnight to midnight, you know, and then you can choose a time that fits your schedule.
Okay. And the first exam would cover all the modules we've covered so far up until that point, or would it?
No, no, it's just going to cover the stuff through the end of this week.
Okay.
That's plenty for the first exam. I'm actually going to have to be out of town that day, and so it's more convenient for me to move the exam then. Other questions?
Dr. Greenlaw?
Yes.
Will you be having a study other than the group study session? Will you be having some sort of a study session?
Yes. The Wednesday before the exam, we'll do that during the Hangout. We'll take an hour or however long it takes to go over the material and answer any questions that you have.
Okay, so that's next Wednesday?
I think so.
Okay.
Let me just check that.
Yeah, it should be because
It
the
would be
29th
That Friday is the
is in
29th.
9 days. Yeah.
Yep. So, oh my gosh, that is next week, isn't it?
Mhm.
Guess I better start thinking about that exam. I guess you better start thinking.
Dear.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
If we were to go back and look at the
Well, then let's call it a night. I will talk to you. In the meantime, you can always shoot me an email if you have a question.